I get a lot of the same fertility questions from patients and people who are just starting their pregnancy journeys. This video is just about that. Real questions, real answers, and a lot of clarification around things that are often misunderstood. Hi, my name's Ina, a naturopathic doctor focused on fertility and a proud mama of 4 after 30. Let's dig in. Question number 8. How much does diet really matter for fertility? Well, it's more than people expect, but less than people actually fear. What most people don't realize is that a small change, only 5 to 10% in your metabolic health, will give you about 80% of the benefit in terms of your fertility. This is not about perfection. It's about supporting your hormone signaling and decreasing inflammation, because blood sugar instability and chronic inflammation disrupt ovulation, progesterone production, and sperm development. And diet is one of the fastest ways to influence those systems without medication. Next question. What are the best foods for fertility? There's a few foods that I always come back to when I think about fertility. Leafy greens like spinach and kale. These are great for blood sugar stability, iron, calcium, and folate. Berries are great for their antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory properties, vitamin C, zinc, and folate. Nuts, especially walnut, for protein, fiber, magnesium, and vitamin E, which all support the uterine lining. Salmon, which is a low mercury fish that is high in omega-3s and DHA. I usually suggest 1 to 2 servings a week and try to get wild caught when possible. As a general rule, I do suggest choosing organic products when possible to my patients, because that reduces the pesticide exposure and toxin load, which can interfere with fertility. There's no real one magic fertility superfood. Fertility responds better to patterns instead of superfoods. As a more general guideline, if I would have to narrow it down further, I would focus on foods that do the following things: support hormones, reduce inflammation, and stabilize blood sugars. That would usually look like this. Number 1, quality protein at every meal. Think eggs, legumes, fish, poultry. Number 2 would be healthy fats. So think olive oil, avocado, and nuts and seeds. Number 3 would be lots of vegetables. Think leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables. And number 4 would be whole food carbs that don't spike your blood sugar. So this is less about adding fertility foods and more about removing things that disrupt your hormones, such as ultra-processed foods, constant snacking, and big blood sugar swings. You don't need a perfect diet. You just need a consistent one that your hormones can rely on. Next question. Why does unexplained infertility happen? And is it actually unexplained? Most of the time, infertility isn't unexplained. It's just unmeasured. Unexplained just means that basic testing did not reveal a diagnosis. Ovulation appears to be happening, tubes are open, sperm count is acceptable, but the pregnancy is still not happening. The problem is that fertility depends on function, not just structure. Things that are commonly missed include things such as ovulation that did happen but isn't strong enough or well-timed, progesterone that rises but isn't high enough or long enough, sperm that look fine on a basic analysis but still have poor DNA integrity, inflammation that interferes with implantation, and an embryo that forms but fails to implant properly. None of these would show up as a single abnormal lab value. In clinic, unexplained infertility becomes understandable when you zoom out and look at things like ovulation, not just that it happened, but how it happened. Hormone timing across the entire cycle, not just one snapshot. Sperm quality beyond just count and motility, and metabolic and inflammatory factors that affect fertility. That's also why many people with unexplained infertility eventually conceive, not because the issue resolved on its own, but because conditions were slowly improved and the right cycle eventually lined up. So, unexplained does not mean hopeless. It just means that the right questions were not asked yet. Question number 11. Do supplements and herbs actually work for fertility? Yes, supplements and herbs can be very effective tools for fertility, but only when they're used intentionally and strategically. Supplements are not meant to replace the body's natural responses. They're there for support. That might mean using supplements to improve ovulation quality, support progesterone production, reduce inflammation, or improve egg and sperm quality, or maybe to help stabilize blood sugars or deal with a stress response. Where supplements really shine is when they're targeted, because different fertility challenges need different kinds of support. So, supporting egg quality would look very different from supporting ovulation. Sperm quality support looks different from implantation support. And conditions such as PCOS, endometriosis, and infertility all benefit from different approaches. When supplements are chosen based on what's actually going on, they can make a measurable difference. They also work best when layered as part of a bigger picture when we talk about things like nutrition, lifestyle, and timing. Not because they're weak, but because fertility is usually multifactorial. So yes, herbs and supplements work, but they're not magic. Yet, they are powerful tools when used thoughtfully and appropriately. Question number 12. What would you focus on first if you're trying to get pregnant right now? 3 things. Number 1, confirm real ovulation. Number 2, optimize timing. And number 3, test both partners early. Not more supplements, not more guessing. Data first. Next, number 13. Would you say drinking alcohol is a no-no when trying to conceive? Occasional alcohol is not really the issue, and sometimes can be really fun and beneficial, but regular intake can affect ovulation quality, sperm DNA, and implantation. Next question. How often should I be having sex if I'm trying to conceive? This one has a lot of misconceptions. Let's break it down. You should be having sex every other day during your fertile window. You don't need to be having sex every other day throughout the month, throughout your cycle, unless you want to. Having sex throughout the month can be great for your relationship, and regular ejaculation supports sperm health. But outside of when you have your fertile cervical mucus, sperm would die within hours and would never make it past the cervix. So for fertility, timing matters more than frequency. Question number 15. What's an ovulation test and how does it work? That's a great question. Ovulation tests work by measuring an LH surge. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. Ovulation tests work by measuring an LH luteinizing hormone surge, which tells us that the body is trying to ovulate. And we actually have a video on that if you're interested in more detail. It's usually a little stick that we dip into a cup with urine that we have collected, and then we wait to see if the test line is darker or as dark as the control line for a positive test, and if it's lighter, that would be a negative test. But it is very important to remember that having a positive LH test does not guarantee that ovulation is going to happen, which is why we rely on other tools such as cervical mucus and basal body temperature when tracking our cycles. How does a pregnancy test work? A pregnancy test, whether it's urine or blood, measures something called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. This hormone is produced at first by the early embryo, by the cells of the early embryo actually that will eventually become the placenta. And once the placenta is in place, then it takes over the job of producing the HCG. HCG's job is to tell your body to continue producing progesterone, which is very, very important in early pregnancy because it stabilizes the uterine lining and allows the pregnancy to continue. Even if fertilization occurs, HCG will not be present until the embryo actually implants. That's why when you have your pregnancy tests, they tell you to not pee on the stick until at least 4 days before your expected period, because implantation will only happen 6 to 10 days after ovulation. And even then, when the embryo implants, it will take a little bit of time before it can produce enough HCG that would be picked up in the urine. Now implant even if fertilization already happened. Why is pregnancy over 35 considered geriatric? Yeah, I don't like that term. The term is very outdated. What it really refers to is that changes in egg quality become much more noticeable after you turn 35, which can then affect conception time and miscarriage risk. But it's important to remember that it's not a cliff. It's a gradual shift, and many healthy pregnancies happen after 35, especially if they have the right support. Okay, moving on. Can you check your fertility if you're not planning on getting pregnant yet, but want to in the future? Yes, and this is actually a smart thing to do. Although you will never be able to predict fertility perfectly, you can actually get some very useful information. For example, on whether you're ovulating, how well coordinated your cycle is, getting some information on your egg reserves, or maybe a sperm analysis, and figuring out your hormone patterns. The goal here should not be a green light or a red light. It's more for planning instead of guessing. Question number 20. How does PCOS affect fertility, and what does blood sugar have to do with it? Great question. PCOS is actually often driven more by insulin and blood sugar than by the ovaries themselves. When insulin is high, the ovaries get mixed messages and they can get confused, which will interfere with ovulation and hormone balance. That's why improving blood sugar regulation often will improve ovulation way before anything else changes. Last question. I have endometriosis. Will that affect my fertility? And what can I do about it? Endometriosis can affect fertility, but it does not affect everyone the same way, and it definitely does not mean that pregnancy is not possible. The biggest issue with endometriosis is not just the presence of lesions, it's more the inflammatory environment that it creates. That inflammation can affect egg quality by exposing the ovary to oxidative stress, interfere with ovulation signaling, disrupt implantation by altering the uterine environment, or it can even affect tubal function or the pelvic anatomy in more advanced cases. What's important to understand with endometriosis is that the severity of symptoms does not always correlate to the severity of the fertility impact, so that someone may have minimal pain but still have a lot of fertility difficulties, while someone else who has a lot of pain might conceive without any problems. What helps is early recognition and proactive support, not waiting until fertility becomes a problem. So from a fertility perspective, the focus is usually on reducing inflammation and oxidative stress, supporting egg quality, optimizing hormone balance and ovulation timing, and being very intentional about timing and ovulation support, and being very intentional about timing and cycle support. For many people, fertility improves significantly with just inflammation control, even without the need for surgeries, while for others, a combination of medical and supportive strategies makes the biggest impact. So endometriosis is not a sentence. It's a condition that requires a more thoughtful and layered approach when fertility is the goal. What I hope that you take away from this is that fertility is rarely about one test, one hormone, or one perfect cycle. So whether you're trying now or thinking of trying later or somewhere in between, having more information gives you more options instead of pressure, which is always the goal. Follow along for more fertility clarity, one step at a time.